Russia is guilty for the murder by poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko, former intelligence service employee, is well established. It was carried out in London in 2006 using polonium-210, a highly toxic radioactive substance, as the European Court of Human Rights states in its decision. The murder of Litvinenko, an outspoken critic of the Kremlin authorities, was committed by two Russians, the Member of Parliament, Andrei Lugovoy, and the entrepreneur Dmitry Kovtun. According to the final report of the British judge Robert Owen, who conducted the public investigation into the murder, the operation was personally approved by FSB Director Nikolai Patushov. Was the case of Litvinenko's assassination the only case where unpleasant to the Kremlin people died a violent death? The Russian government scorns both the security and the laws of any country. In fact, at any place, any dirty assassination methods can be used by the Russian killers. The Russian octopus seems to stretch its tentacles throughout the world. And it is safe to assume that no nation in the world is able to protect itself from the possibility of another murder by the Kremlin on its sovereign territory. So, how does Russia get rid of its opponents? My name is Gregor Razumovsky, and today I'll tell you a little bit more about what Russia really thinks about human rights and freedom. The former colonel of the Russian Military Intelligence Service, the GRU, Sergei Skripal, and his daughter were poisoned in their own house in the city of Salisbury in spring 2018. According to the police, the day before, Anatoly Chepiga and Alexander Mishkin, two Kremlin special agents of the GRU, traveled to Salisbury under an alias. They smeared a neurotoxin, the highly lethal nerve agent Novichok, on the handle of the Skripals' front door. According to the results of the chemical analysis carried out by world-leading experts at the Defense Science and Technology Laboratory at Porton Down, this is a military-grade nerve agent of a type developed by Russia. Theresa May, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom at that time, was certain that the brazen poisoning was pure revenge. To quote her, "To our knowledge that Russia has previously produced this agent and would still be capable of doing so." In addition to that, the British Domestic Intelligence Service, MI5, had concluded that Russia was still ordering and perpetrating assassinations of the defectors, considering them to be legitimate targets of elimination. The Skripals poisoning is one terrifying example, among others, of how Russia pursues and murders individuals even when they don't pose a direct threat to the Kremlin anymore. Apart from the Skripals, Novichok claimed 3 further victims in Salisbury, one of whom could not be saved. Shortly before midnight on February 27 in 2015, the Russian opposition leader, Boris Nemtsov, was gunned down near the Kremlin. It was the most prominent political murder in Russia since President Vladimir Putin came to power. Bellingcat, the insider, and the BBC found evidence that Putin's murdered rival was tailed by agents linked to an FSB hit squad. The meticulous spying on opposition leader Nemtsov by the FSB began immediately after his active lobbying for the expansion of sanctions on the entourage of the Russian president. Having analyzed the database of the ticket reservation system, it turned out that Boris Nemtsov was secretly accompanied by at least 3 civil servants of the FSB. They were Valery Sukharov, Dmitry Sukhinin, and Alexei Krivoshokov. The names of Sukharov and Krivoshokov appeared in the previous Bellingcat investigations of the poisoning of the several Russian opposition leaders, such as Alexei Navalny and Vladimir Kara-Murza, and also the poet and journalist Dmitry Bykov. The investigators consider Valery Sukharov to be an employee of the second directorate of the FSB, the Service for the Protection of Constitutional Order. Its task is to prevent internal political threats. The Kremlin has denied all accusations, claiming that the Russian government has nothing to do with that investigation. To quote, "It seems to be a new false report," the spokesman of Russia's president, Dmitry Peskov, says. The killers, officially suspected by the Kremlin, were arrested a few days after the murder. 5 men of Chechen origin were sentenced to 11 to 20 years in prison. However, they never pleaded guilty. Members of the opposition put the responsibility for the murders on Putin, saying that, to quote, "Such a resonant and demonstrative liquidation of the opposition was aimed at intimidating and silencing dissidents by showing them that disobedience can lead to physical annihilation." April 2010, Poland's president, Lech Kaczynski, accompanied by his wife and more than 80 officials, flew from Warsaw to the Russian city of Smolensk to pay tribute to the victims of the Katyn massacre, where 22,000 Polish military officers were shot on Stalin's order during World War II. 70 years later, the Polish delegation never arrived. Under extremely suspicious circumstances, President Kaczynski's plane didn't reach the airstrip by several hundred meters. 96 people, including 8 crew members, died. In one moment, Poland lost a significant part of its elite. The president, government officials, parliamentarians, military commanders, and opinion leaders. The Special Commission of the Polish government has claimed that the Russian assassination plan was behind the plane crash. Russia's position is that the crash was caused by fog and pilot's fault. However, at the same time, the Russian Federation complicated the access to the black box. The original record by the Smolensk North Military Aerodrome have not been handed over to Poland till now. The latest data from the Polish Investigative Commission indicates that the accident could have been caused by 2 explosions. The traces of trinitrotoluene, hexogen, and penthrite on the plane fragments are the evidence. The investigators conclude that thermobaric charges were used to blow up the plane. The traces of chemical explosives were also found in those sections of the plane where neither the crew nor the passengers had access. But Russia had it. In December 2009, a few months before the disaster, the presidential plane was overhauled at the Russian aviation plant Aviakor in Samara. The plant belongs to Putin's good friend Adiek Deripaska. According to the Polish government commission, it was a good opportunity to plant explosives at that time. Kaczynski openly condemned the crimes of Stalinism and the efforts of Putin's Russia to shift responsibility for the outbreak of World War II to Germany, denying the aggressive intentions and actions of the Soviet Union. The Smolensk air disaster marked the first violent death of a democratically elected head of state in the history of the EU. Sergei Skripal, a former top manager of Russia's largest natural gas producer, Novatek, was found hanged in the garden of his Spanish holiday home. The bodies of his wife and daughter were also discovered hacked to death with an axe. At least 8 prominent Russian businessmen have died, allegedly by suicide since January 2022. 3 of them supposedly killed their families before taking their own lives. All these dead millionaires were associated with the Russian state-owned energy giant Gasprom. If we look at the positions of the deceased and the circumstances of their deaths, I believe that we can see a clear pattern. Let's have a look. The head of the transport department at Gazprom Invest, Leonid Shulman, was found dead in his apartment. The conclusion of the investigative Russian agencies was suicide. The Deputy General Director of Gazprom for Corporate Security, Alexander Tilyakov, was found dead. The conclusion of the police was suicide. The former Gazprom Bank Vice President, Vladislav Avayev, was found dead with his family. According to the preliminary investigation of the Russian authorities, Avayev killed his family and later committed suicide. Let's continue this list. The billionaire and owner of the huge Nemtsov company, Vasily Melnikov, also allegedly killed his wife and children and then committed suicide. The chairman of oil giant Lukoil, Ravil Maganov, died after falling out of the window of a hospital in Moscow. All of them had huge fortunes that were threatened by the sanctions. Thus, they could cooperate, or might have cooperated already, with the West. Following this reasoning, we come to the logical conclusion that the epidemic of suicides seems to be a demonstrative message to those who still dare to doubt that Moscow's position is indisputable. In March 2022, the Russian army and mercenaries of the Wagner Group came to the home of Olha Sukhenko, the head of the village of Motizhen in Kyiv region. They kidnapped Olha, as well as her husband and son. The occupiers tortured their prisoners, trying to get information about the armed forces of Ukraine. According to the investigation by Ukrainian authorities, in front of the woman's eyes, her son was killed with a shot to the head. Olha's husband was murdered in a similar way. The whole family died of multiple gunshot wounds. For years, the Wagner private military company has done Moscow's dirty work in eastern Ukraine, in Libya, in Syria, and some parts of sub-Saharan Africa. The list of accomplishments of the group is extensive. It includes dealing with blood diamonds, supporting autocrats, mounting of destructive disinformation campaigns. But the core activities are violence and the elimination of real or potential enemies of the Kremlin. The Council of Europe clearly states, the Wagner Group has recruited, trained and sent private military operatives to conflict zones around the world to fuel violence, loot natural resources and intimidate civilians in violation of international law, including international human rights law. It is impressive that Russian prisoners convicted of serious crimes are being recruited into the group en masse. The Kremlin always officially denied any relationship with Wagner, whose soldiers for hire have been accused of numerous massacres and other human rights violations. But now, Wagner and its mercenaries have suddenly emerged from the shadows in the war on Ukraine, openly celebrated on Russian state media and lauded as heroes of President Putin's bloody invasion. This is the YouTube channel The Power of Reason. Always remember that true power lies in rational thought and a clear mind. When we are threatened with the daily flow of disinformation and the manipulation of news, so please do the reasonable thing and subscribe to our channel right now.